I'll mute myself now.
So thank heavens, I'm sure everybody is saying thanks for your patience there. We're about 4 minutes late starting, but I'm sure you'll forgive us for that. So welcome to our webinar on setting realistic expectations of your child's behaviour. It's really great to see some familiar faces here and to see our educators here too. So a huge welcome from me. Let me just share my screen so we can take you through some slides. Then you've got something to look at. Okay, all right, here we go. So let's start by understanding that all behaviour is a form of communication. It's an attempt to meet a physical or emotional need. And most behaviour challenges are simply exploration and a normal part of child development. Probably one of our biggest stresses, but quite normal. So what we're going to cover in this webinar is how to set realistic expectations of your child's behaviour. And there are 4 key things to remember. One is to consider the physiological needs of the child, you know, their physical needs. The next is their emotional needs, but also considering their developmental stage, their level of understanding or ability, and then understanding your child's natural dispositions, your child's unique personality. Nobody knows your child better than you, and if you're educators, as many of you are, nobody knows the children much better than you either. You know, as you know, education is a relationship-based thing. So, you know, the most important thing is to really get to know your child or the children in your care. And once you know them and understand them, then you can be responding to their communication or behavioural challenges in a way that meets their individual needs. So let's look at key number 1. So key number 1 is about meeting the physiological needs. And this is probably one of the easiest, but forms the foundation of everything. So this links very well to Maslow's hierarchy of needs as well. So Abraham Maslow was a psychologist, and he created this triangle, this hierarchy of needs that every single human has. That includes adults, children, every one of us, all human beings. And basically, it says at the bottom of the pyramid, until each of us have had our physiological needs met, until we have enough air, food, water, shelter, sleep, clothing, etc., then we don't even, the rest of the needs don't exist, because we're so focused on having our basic needs met that, you know, our need for our sense of security does not yet exist in our level of consciousness. Then as we have our physiological needs met, then we start to look at more our health and well-being. We're out of survival mode now, so we're looking at how we can thrive, looking at our health, well-being, emotional safety and sense of security. It's only once them needs are met that we start to look at more higher needs like love and belonging, looking towards friendship groups, intimacy, family, and our sense of connection with other human beings. We can't even think about that if we're starving, can we? So you can see how one need builds upon another. And then once we've got the need for love and belonging, then we start looking at respect and self-esteem and status recognition, and eventually to the point where we are reaching self-actualization, which is the concept of being the best version of ourselves that we can be. So reaching self-actualization for all of us really is a lifelong journey. So based on that principle, we need to be thinking the same for our children. So, you know, if children are feeling, if they're hungry or if they're cold or if they're tired, they don't always come up to us and say, hey, can I have my lunch? I'm feeling pretty hungry right now. Or I'm feeling tired, I need to have a sleep. They actually don't always realize that for themselves, that's the reason they feel the way they feel. So it's really important that you're in tune with the children, so you can predict that they might be hungry or they might be tired. And also, as many of you will know, we might know our child is completely exhausted, but still the last thing they want to do is sleep, because we have like little energy bunnies of children who are so in love with life and full of enthusiasm that, you know, sometimes to get them to the point where they'll actually slow down enough to then go and have a rest or a sleep can be quite challenging. But it is something that we do, and we do really well generally. So if you just remember HALT, that's a really nice way of remembering, you know, if a child is being grumpy or behaving badly, are they hungry? Are they angry? Are they lonely? Or are they tired? So if you think about those four, and keep that little anagram, not anagram, what is it? Whatever it's called anyway, keep the word HALT in your mind and then check every one of those states before you look at any higher order needs. So the physiological side is really quite easy. But for the emotional needs, less so. So we need to then, once we know our children are comfortable, physically comfortable, then we start to look at those higher needs, those emotional needs. Because we know that if children are stressed, that they're really not going to be listening to us. And also, as we've covered on previous webinars, that a perceived stress or a perceived threat can feel as threatening as a real life threat. So if your child is feeling frightened about something, or maybe feeling stressed about a situation, even if you don't think it's a major deal or a major stress, for a child it really can be. You know, for example, I don't know, having something that, being told they can't have something that they want, or hearing two adults fight, or hearing a loud bang, or a dog jumping up at them. There are so many little situations that can be a really big deal in the life of a child and send them straight into this fight, flight, or freeze response. So, and if a child is stressed, it doesn't matter how much you try and reason with them and talk to them, they're just not going to hear you. Just like all of us, you know, when we're in a hyper-stressed state, then we're not in a receptive state for learning or for reasoning very often. Put a huge spider by me and you won't reason with me at all. I'll be out the door in no time at all. And I'm sure each one of you have got your little thing that might bother you. So to reduce stress, then we need to have predictable rituals and routines. And that creates a sense of comfort and control for the child. And it supports them to regulate and manage their feelings. Because without a predictable routine, then it can feel to children like things are changing all the time, last minute, and that they've got no sense of control over their environment or what's going to happen. And that can hugely elevate their stress levels. So it's really important to have a very calm setting, a very calm home environment where everything is predictable, and that builds their sense of safety and security. And then being consistent in behavioural expectations as well. And you'll have all seen this, I certainly have, that, you know, if, I don't know, one parent says one thing and another parent says another, then the child gets confused. You know, if like mum always lets me have lollies after dinner, and maybe my other mum or my dad would say no. So what would happen is the child then would just constantly test the boundaries to see what they can get away with. And that looks like really bad behaviour, you know, because they're whinging and crying and kicking up a fuss because they can't have lollies after tea. But because you've been inconsistent in you know, your expectations of the child and whether they're allowed these things, then the child's confused. Children act out their feelings so that they'll just keep testing and testing until they work out where the boundaries do actually sit. It can be really challenging for parents. So the easiest thing is to both be clear on what the expectations are and stick to it. And then also being calm and considerate and respectful in your responses. And in that too, be aware of your tone and your body language. Children are really smart and they pick up on little things like, you know, you're saying yes, but you've got a really angry look on your face because they shouldn't have asked you in the first place, or you know, that kind of situation can be really, really confusing to children. So it's always best to make your tonality and your body language match the message you're trying to convey, and you know, try and keep it as respectful as you possibly can. Even though inside you could be really stressed yourself, the best thing to do is to remain in control, because a child who is out of control needs the calm reassurance of someone who is in control. It's not worth you both losing it and both throwing tantrums at the same time, even though it's probably what you might feel like doing at times. So it's really, really important to do that. And being aware too that the well-being of each child is interdependent with the well-being of teachers and parents and the family too. Children do, like adults, children will pick up on stresses of the people around them. And sometimes they can't always make sense of that, so it can cause an immense amount of stress for the child too. So I'm just thinking that we can have, if anybody's got any questions or comments to make along the way, please do put them in chat, because I'm sure we'll have time to come to questions as we come through. So I'm definitely open to answering any questions as we go. We all good with that? All right, and the reason that children need a safe and secure emotional environment is because their brain is under massive state of development at this stage. The brain is, I think, 80% of its adult size by the age of 3, and it's constantly creating neural connections, as well as pruning between birth and the age of 8. So there's so much growth and development in the brain at this stage. And also children's reasoning brain is not yet sufficiently developed. So children are hugely reactive, hugely, to use, I guess to simply put it simply, we have a left brain and right brain. And there's no such thing as one brain working independently from the other. They both work together. But as just to I guess, convey a very complex subject, the right brain is very emotional. It works on image, non-verbal cues, and is very holistic. The right brain is more about the context of a situation, where we add meaning to a situation, I guess, and meaning and emotion. Whereas the left brain is more logical, it's more literal, it's more linguistic, and very linear in the way it operates. And for young children, their left brain is not yet sufficiently developed, or doesn't have enough of the neural connections to always be able to make sense of experiences, which is why for young people, for children particularly under 3, they are very reactive and very emotional in their responses. And it's just normal development, because they're still learning language, they're still learning about life and logic and how to make sense of the world, because they simply haven't had enough life experience to be able to apply what they've learned to different situations. So it does take patience and understanding, and we can tell when the child's left brain is starting to kick in a lot more, and they've got more of their neural pathways. And you'll know when that happens, because they'll start to ask why. So, for children of 3 or up, it's generally their favorite question, constantly asking why. And that's a good sign. Your child's brain is developing really well when you get to that stage. But similarly, for 2 children under 3, being very right brain dominant, you can see this in their behaviours, and I'm sure this is a very familiar picture for many of you. And there's a reason that for children under 3, they often say the terrible twos, because children at this age are really starting to get a sense of who they are, and a sense of, I am separate from you, I'm a separate human being, and beginning to really assert themselves. But they don't yet have the left brain is not yet truly fully developed for them to always have a logical understanding of what's happening, to be able to put into words what they're feeling or what their needs are. And that can be extremely frustrating. They know what they want, they know what they want to go for, but they can't always articulate that, or they can't articulate it as fast as they can think it. So it can be quite a challenging time for many young children. between the ages of 2 and 3. And when we talk about ages, we're talking about them loosely, because obviously it goes by the stage of development, not what number they are in years. But that gives you a rough guide, because, you know, it's not, like I say, it's not at all about their age. So, and like I say, you only have to observe babies and toddlers' response to not getting what they want, to know that this is a very right brain reaction. And I'm sure, so if anybody's experienced this, do put it in chat. I'd love to know I'm not the only one, although I'm sure I'm not. Cool. So, and we talked about this in a previous webinar, that when children are experiencing high emotion, it can be really, really overwhelming for them. You know, when you have a child who's in a state of, they're actually throwing a tantrum, it's very, very scary for them, because they've completely lost control, and it really is frightening. You know, it's literally, once they reach the point of a tantrum, it's that fight or flight response, and it can be very traumatic and very hard for the child to calm down. So during an outburst, during a tantrum state, then we need to stay calm and to talk in a soothing tone of voice, offering support. You know, just maybe sometimes if you can bring a child close and hold them, great, but sometimes they're completely gone and you can't, you know, the helicopter arms and legs, and there's no way that you could do that. Well, in that case, just stay nearby and talk in a calming tone of voice, and just allow the child to work through the tantrum. They will stop, and when they do, very often they'll be in floods of tears, they'll be sobbing, and they'll be scared. So if they will allow you to bring them in close, give them physical contact, and just let them know that you're there. A hug goes a long way. And people often say, don't be hugging them, that reinforces the behaviour. It doesn't at all, because they've got to that state because they've lost control. So you can tell the difference between a fake tantrum and a real tantrum. A fake tantrum, you could say, do you want some lollies, and they'll stop. Whereas a real tantrum, they don't even know where they are, what planet they're on or anything. They've completely lost it. So it's really, really important that we do stay calm. I'm just reading a chat here. It says, do we have Facebook Live? My friends can't access Zoom, so aren't able to listen. Just bear with me a second. Let me just check something. I wonder, Sam, if you can hear me, whether you can check on that. We will have a recording afterwards, so we'll be able to send that out to you. So I'm sure Sam will check in the background. So once the child has regained control, then is the time to talk about what happened. So, you know, once they're calm and you've reassured them and they're open and receptive, then you'll be able to talk about it. And a real good thing to do at this point is to ask them how they feel, because remember, this is a teachable moment. So you don't want to lose this opportunity to teach children how to self-regulate and how to manage their emotions. So ask them how they feel. If they can't express it, because often they don't have the words, then support them in finding the words, because in doing that, you're developing their emotional literacy, and that will help them avoid getting into that state next time. And be careful not to judge as well. The goal is to encourage children to talk about it. So be as understanding as you possibly can, and maybe just listen to them. It's not necessarily the time to give them a lecture. The time to talk to them about what happened is before it happens next time. Great way to teach children about you know, their emotional intelligence or, you know, emotional literacy is through storytelling. So, you know, it could be that you make up a story at bedtime about a child that was in a similar situation and how they dealt with that situation, so that you're not directly you're not giving them a lecture or shaming them about what happens, because it's already a very stressful situation for the child. So it's definitely a teachable moment, but it's more about teaching them the emotional literacy, giving them the words to express how they feel. You can talk about what happened and teach that outside of this situation. If anyone has any questions, do post them in chat, because sometimes this is a very common challenge and things that can upset parents a lot too, because it's quite distressing to watch a child lose control to that degree. I remember with my eldest son, he did it outside a huge shop in England, and it was a really busy street, and he completely lost it. I can't remember what over, but I remember I was absolutely mortified, and he was on the floor kicking and screaming, and like I say, helicopter arm and legs, so I couldn't get close to him because his legs and arms were flying everywhere. And there was a whole circle of well-meaning people giving me advice, you know, and telling me how shameful it is that I should allow my child to get away with that behaviour. I don't think I had an awful lot of choice. I couldn't do anything about it, but it was very scary and very stressful for us both. So if you ever see a parent in that situation, please try and be understanding, because every parent is doing the best they can with the skills they have. And the reason we have these webinars is to support parents, because it's my goal that every child gets the best start in life, and every parent enjoys as much as they can almost every moment of their child's early years, because they are so precious and they don't last long. So my goal is to support all of you to make the most of it, because I have grandchildren now, and my children are all grown up, and I wish I knew some of these things back when my children were smaller. So, you know, remembering too the development stage and level of understanding of the child. So this is key number 3. And we often get advice from everyone and his mate on what we should or shouldn't be doing with our children, and what we should let them do, what we should not let them do. And, you know, it's all well-meaning, but it feels like we're bombarded. It's like a fire hose of advice from every different direction. And, you know, it can be very, very challenging, because you know your child best. So in all of this, I would also say follow your instinct, because normally it leads you in the right direction. Excuse me. So when we're looking at developmental stages, remember that 25% of challenging behaviour is children just being children. It's absolutely normal. So don't worry about it. So, and a lot of it is childhood exuberance, just the natural enthusiasm of being a child, or a child's natural curiosity. You know, they're exploring. They might have just deconstructed deconstructed your brand new herb garden or something, but really to them they're being a scientist and they're learning about the world around them. There's no bad intent, they're just naturally curious. So often it's because they don't know better. They just don't have that life experience to know that some things shouldn't be said or some things shouldn't be done. You know, it's such a lot for a child to learn. Excuse me. They learn so much in those early years, and they are so competent that sometimes we can expect too much of them. Sorry, I've got a frog in my throat. And then, of course, we got to loss of control. And often there's a loss of control because of a lack of understanding, not because they're trying to get their own way. I mean, there are many easier ways to get your own way than throwing a tantrum. So, you know, always believe the good in the child, and, you know, have these as teachable moments, rather than jump into conclusions and thinking they're doing that on purpose or to get their own way, which is sometimes what well-meaning friends might say to you. So if 25% of behaviour is children being children, just imagine that and think about that for a moment. That means for that 25% of the behavioural challenges, you don't even have to worry about. It's not, your child's not going to grow up being a bad person or doing bad things. It's just a normal part of childhood. So use it as a teachable moment and just don't stress about it. It's just what it's like having children around. And then when we think about this too, the other 75% is a reaction to our attempts to control them. It's pretty incredible, that, isn't it? So if we stop trying to control and we allow children to be children, then behaviour is not an issue, unless we make it an issue in our own minds. And yes, of course, I am not saying, you know, I work with children and I have grandchildren. I know that it can be really challenging, and I know that behaviour can be a challenge as well. But more often than not, if we look at it for what it is, as a form of communication, and as for most parts a natural part of being a child and early childhood, then we remove the stress away from dealing with behavioural challenges. And we just think, well, children have to learn about behaviour, and children have to learn about their emotions, just like they have to learn how to walk and how to feed themselves and how to tie their shoelaces. So if we look at it from that point of view, we remove a lot of the stress from ourselves. So also accept, just like you, your child's going to have bad days. So it's unrealistic to expect a child to always obey an instruction from you. And it's also destructive to think that when they don't do as they're told, that you've got to win, that it becomes a battle between the two of you. That can be really destructive to your relationship with your child. So it's very realistic to expect that sometimes they'll follow through with instructions and sometimes they simply won't. But don't make it into a battle. Just find creative ways to encourage your child to follow through with your instructions, and give children a good reason to do it. Sorry. Give children a good reason to do it, and more often than not, they will. So a few little hints here is give children as much choice as possible. The more you can offer children choices, the more autonomy they have, the more they feel good about themselves. It builds their confidence and their self-esteem. And of course, giving them choices, you're giving them less to resist. So sometimes a good strategy is, rather than put your shoes on, it could be, which shoes do you want to wear today, your blue ones or your red ones? And then they're focused on choosing the shoes. Suddenly their shoes are on and they're out the door. Or what toy do you want to take with you today? Or, you know, if you give a child a choice, it focuses their mind on the choice, and they're often not thinking about resisting what's going to happen next, because it's a whole positive experience for them. Always be honest with children. Be honest about your intent, because if you're not, they'll know. And then if they know that if you're saying one thing, but they believe you're saying or feeling another, then chances are they'll start to demonstrate that confusion in challenging behavior. So always be honest, be open about your reasons and your expectations of them. So it's best to say what you want them to do and why it's important. And children are really smart. They'll more often than not comply if there's a good reason to do that. So explaining the rationale behind something can make a big difference. Make life fun. Make it fun. Make things into a game. So, you know, most people you'll see will make cleaning children's teeth into a game, or they'll play games and make the whole bedtime routine into a fun experience. All of these little tricks can help make what might be a routine task into a very positive experience for you both. And always be a good example to your child. And when you're thinking about emotional intelligence as well, think about that. Where are you being a good example? Where are you being honest about how you feel? You know, if you've had a really bad day and you're not feeling good, then, you know, it's okay to admit you've had a bad day. And sometimes things can go wrong, or, you know, you've had a loss in the family and you feel sad. Children know if you're sad. Children can feel it as well. So sometimes it's best to be honest, like, I'm feeling sad today because my friend's sick, or whatever it might be. It's really good to be honest with children. I'm not saying burden them with all your problems. That's very different. But I'm sure you get what I mean by that. So what we can look at as defiance or not doing as you're told can be simply that the child didn't understand the instruction. So a simple rule of thumb when given instructions is 1 instruction for a 1-year-old, 2 instructions for a 2-year-old, and 3 instructions for a 3-year-old. So 1 instruction might be, I don't know, you're busy and you've got to get ready for the school run. So for a 1-year-old, you might say, can you get your coat? For it might be. For a 2-year-old, it could be, can you put your coat on and get your shoes? And for a 3-year-old, it could be, can you put your coat on, get your shoes, and get your school bag? So, and that's enough, you know, as a rule of thumb, that's enough information for each of those ages or stages of development to retain that information in their head and follow through with the instruction without getting distracted and going off and do something else. And sometimes that might happen too. Cool. Okay. Always give positive instructions. So name the action you want, not the action you don't want. So it's funny, as humans, we often remember the last couple of words in a sentence, and that's what we tend to follow through with. So for example, if I said, don't think about pink elephants, you wouldn't be able to stop yourself picturing a pink elephant. And I bet every one of you did that because we are quite visual in how we think. So, so it's very hard not to think of pink elephants. So if you think about, if you say stop running, the word that children will hear and pick up on is running. So they might not actually get the instruction was to stop running. So instead of saying don't run, you might say take small steps, because then they retain the take small steps and they're more likely to follow through with that instruction. And it's surprising how effective that is. And key number 4 is to understand your child's natural disposition. And we talked about this on the last webinar as well. It's so important to personalize and individualize education and experiences for children. And it all starts with their unique personality and looking at every child as an individual, because a one-size-fits-all model doesn't work. Any of you who've had more than one child, you'll know that your siblings, your 2 children, will be very, very different from each other in personality and in how they react and respond to situations. And, you know, every child is a uniquely, perfectly perfect individual, and they should be treated as such. So we need to take the time to get to understand them and to know them, to really know them. So in doing that, you're going to help to limit or avoid stressful situations. Because if you understand that your child doesn't cope with being in playgroup for more than 20 minutes, then why make them stay an hour? Because you know you're going to see behavioural challenges, and it stresses you, it stresses the child, and nobody's learning anything. So, you know, it's really important to understand the individual. It also supports you in understanding the child in order to have realistic expectations of behaviour as well. If you've got a sensory sensitive child, then you know that getting that child dressed in the morning is going to be a challenge, particularly if you're asking them to wear rough materials. So understanding that child, you can make life a lot easier for both of you by supporting their individual needs. And it supports you too in teaching them to manage their own emotions as well. Because if you understand them, you'll learn what strategies work best. And I'll touch a little bit on what we covered in the last webinar, but only briefly, and then we'll look at each individual personality type. When we talk about personality types, and I've got this image of the brain here where we're looking at introverted children, more left brain types. We've got extroverted children, children who are more sensory, and children who are more intuitive and creative. There's no person that is any one of them things. We're all of them, but some children and adults too, like I'm more frontal lobe, more intuitive, and I've got my husband's more left brain and introverted in their dominant personality type, but we all use the whole of the brain, and we're all of those people, but we might be more dominant in some areas than others. So if we understand the development stage and unique personality of the child and where they're at that time in their life, then this whole idea, this whole concept is a great way for us to support them through these different stages. So children who are more introverted, their behaviour might be that they become more clingy in play groups or large situations. They might hold on to your leg throughout the whole of a play group and not really want to participate. They might appear shy when meeting new people. They might be happy to spend time in solitary play, not necessarily being unfriendly, but enjoying the time that they spend alone. They can become anxious and overwhelmed because they might worry, internalize things, and maybe not be so good to verbalize their feelings and their thoughts. So for children who display these strong personality traits, it's really important that you're honest with them and you give them the rules and the boundaries and explain the rationale. Important for all children, like I say, we all use the whole brain, but for children who are more introverted, it's especially important for them. And can anybody here relate to that? Do you have children who are maybe a bit more shy, or do you look after children who are a bit more shy in social situations? What can happen here is we can look at the child and we can think, right, that child's got to learn how to be more sociable. We need to teach that child that they've got to get used to going to play groups because they'll be starting school soon, or they need to be a bit more sociable with other children when they come to visit. Yes, you want to teach that. You want to teach them to be able to cope in those situations, but forcing them into that situations doesn't teach them. It does quite the opposite. It can make them withdraw even further. So introverted people and children are not antisocial at all. It just means they get their energy. They can top up their energy reserves by spending time alone. So it's really important that you allow them that time to do that. And if you can do that, if you can make sure that you meet the child's individual needs, they are more likely to cope in those social situations. They're more likely to cope with an extended period of time in play groups, etc. So that's looking at introverted children. Then if we come to the more extroverted personality types, what they can look like, and this can to some people look like a behavioral challenge, is that extroverted children can be over exuberant, and they can be, terms what might be a negative term, like in your face, always on the go, a chatterbox, doesn't give me a minute's peace. They're always attention seeking or a show off. They can be demanding of your time and energy. They love social situations. They tend to hate being excluded or feeling like they're not part of a friendship group. And being the opposite of introverted, they do not like to spend too much time alone. So if they spend too much time alone, you're going to see more attention-seeking behaviour. So it's really important that with extroverted children, that you don't dull their spark. You don't label them as being a chatterbox or a show off. And I'm sure there's many other words you can think of. We've all heard them. It's actually a real gift to be so sociable and to be a people person. So you don't want to be dulling their spark. You don't want to be making them feel like they shouldn't be who they are. But you might want to teach them to sometimes give other people a chance to have a go. You might need to teach them to sometimes stand back and allow someone else to take the limelight for a moment. But you can do that without belittling them or making them feel that they're bad by doing that. If you have an extroverted child and you spend too much time in the house and you're not going out much and they're not having many opportunities for social situations, then you're going to see their behaviour get worse. So it's really important that they have that opportunity to engage with other children in play groups or in forest schools, you know, all those events that we run in Education Angels, but many of you take your children to as well. And for extroverted children, they're so fun-loving. They really are, you know, the bright, bubbly personalities. If there's something that your child is resisting, then this type of personality really respond well to you turning it into a game and to making it fun. And if you do that, you're going to get them most likely doing most of what you need them to do. And then if we've got 2 more personality types to look at, and then we can go to questions. We'll probably have a good 5 or 10 minutes to ask any questions we might have. Sensory children. Now, sensory children can become overwhelmed in very stimulating environments, particularly loud or busy places. So it's not the same necessarily as being introverted. They are more sensory, as in if it's too stimulating, they can become introverted, and they can back off, and they can look like they're being shy, when actually it's more that there's too much stimulation in the environment for them. Sensory children can be very sensitive and easily upset. They can pick up on other people's moods. So if you go into an environment that doesn't feel very good, you might see the child's behaviour change, and they might not be able to articulate what's bothering them, but it's more that they are so in tune with other people that they're picking up on someone else's stuff, essentially. They can often sulk if they're not getting their own way, and they can sulk forever. And that's because they're quite comfortable with, you know, being with themselves and not being, they won't necessarily always put up a fight for what they want, or, you know, put forward. Some children will persist until they get what they want, whereas more sensory children are less likely to sulk about it and go quiet until they can work through the emotion and then come back through the other side. And they love one-on-one time or small group play. So sensory children tend to form small group friendships. They might have just one friend who is really special to them. And, you know, that can be a challenge if they fall out with that friend. But, you know, that's just part of life's journey and part of their learning. So sensory children sometimes can be sensory sensitive as well. And so they are more sensitive to stimulants, stimulating environments, but also to, you know, if you think there's the sense of touch, their skin might be ultra sensitive. They might not like rough fabrics, or to be in places where I can't let me, you know, where it like bright disco environments or loud play groups or something that is really bright and colourful. They need somewhere to retreat if they're not coping, then to have a quiet space. So think about your home environment or your home-based environment. Then do you have a place where a child who's more sensory can just go and have a book and cozy on up in a corner somewhere that's really quiet, and it can help them to just settle everything down. If they can regulate their own senses and their own emotions, then you're less likely to see behavioural challenges. And if you have a sensory child who's not really very cooperative, then be a good example to them. And a good way for more sensory children is to say, let me come and help you. So, you know, if you want them to tidy away the blocks, don't just instruct them to tidy them away and leave them to it. Maybe just go and say, hey, shall we tidy up the blocks before we do this? And start to do the job with them, and you'll find that more often than not, they'll participate and support. And then finally, we have the intuitive or more imaginative and creative child. So interesting, all children are intuitive. Remember, it's the whole brain. We are all of this profile, but for some children, it's quite a dominant style for them. That's a dominant part of their brain. Intuitive children are very imaginative. They are always task focused, they're very busy, they're very creative. So, and they don't like being told what to do. So it's really challenging for them to be constantly given instructions and told what to do and when to do it, because they're so busy and they have so many ideas of their own, they won't listen to anybody else's. Even if it's not an idea and it's a necessary thing that they put the shoes on because you're going outside. You know, for them, they might be engaged in imaginative play or in the middle of something, and it's not convenient to do that right now. Thank you very much. So the children who are this personality type can be easily bored or distracted. So boredom is the worst thing for these children. If they are very bored, they'll probably create their own fantasy land. So they might be constantly daydreaming. So, you know, it's which can be a challenge if you're in a hurry and you're trying to get them engaged in what you're doing and they're not even responding because they're in a world of their own. They like to be kept busy for sure. So with these children, the good thing is to understanding they don't like being told what to do, then offer them as many choices as possible. Ask them how they want to do it, when they want to do it, or who they want to do it with. You know, all questions like that are going to better engage children who are a lot more intuitive and imaginative. So remember, for children under 3 in particular, but especially under 5, but children under 3, the imaginal realm is as real life. And if you've got an intuitive, imaginative child, don't be surprised if they're talking about seeing things that you can't see, because the imagination is so strong and the intuition is so strong for these children that sometimes they can say things that are quite scary and you know, a bit worrying. But if they do, just listen to them and believe them, because to them it's real. Yeah? So, and it can be as real as you and I are to each other. So the last thing you want to do is frighten them. Just let them talk and talk it through with them. It's really, really important. So we can go to questions about, you know, do you have any children who you have a particular behavioural challenge? Does anything here challenge you? Do you have any questions about what I've talked about? You can either, I don't know whether you can open mic on this webinar, but you can certainly put questions in Q&A or in chat. Has anyone had experiences where children have talked to you about things they can see or hear? I know we've had it in a childcare centre. I had a child who used to tell me there was a man that used to sit by the sleep room all the time. And, you know, this child used to, because the thing is, if you react to that in a way that is from your own fear or uncertainty, then you'll frighten the child. So, you know, it's just in their imagination. They can't see it. Who's arguing? You know, if they can, let's just talk about it and let them, you know, give them a positive affirmation that you know, that they're not wrong, and be careful not to frighten them as well. Yeah, now this is the thing, as a parent, what do you do if your child says there's a ghost or a monster hiding in the closet? Nearly every child has that fear, right? And maybe some do see things in the closet, and it can be very, very real to the child. Just because it's not real to us doesn't mean it's not real to them. The great thing is children have a fantastic imagination. This is part of the challenge, and why they see that, you know, they are making a sound or a noise means something different. So use that imagination and create a ritual around how they keep themselves safe. So, you know, you could talk about that same monster and say he's a friendly monster. There's plenty of kids' storybooks out there, you know, with like Big Blue Monster, you know, and the monster's really friendly and the monster's there to look after them, because you know there's no real threat in this life to that child at that moment. So either make it into a friendly monster and talk about it, or have a special crystal. Give children crystals to have if they're not too young, to have near their bed, and you know that keeps them, that protects them. and that's what keeps the monsters away. Or you know, and if it's really, really scary, have a dimly lit room so they can see that there's nothing there. But sometimes children do see something and they may well be just imagining it. But that's why it's sometimes better to talk about it like it's real, but that it's a really friendly monster and they're looking after them, and maybe they could talk to the monster, because they're making it in their mind to something scary because they don't understand it. If you can switch that to something friendly, and that's looking after them, then that can take the fear away from the situation, and then the situation will probably look after itself. I know that's a strategy that many people have used in the past, and I used it with one of my sons as well. So it becomes like their friend, and they talk to it and say goodnight to it, etc., etc. Let's talk more about tantrums. It's still good practice to let your little ones cry out. Yeah, okay. Yes, good question, Sam. So let's talk more about tantrums, says Sam. Is it still good practice to let your little ones cry out? They said it can affect the neural connections in the brain. Okay, so yes, I think what you're talking about there, Sam, is that the brain is so rapidly developing that, you know, if children spend too much time in fear and stress, then their brain becomes wired for fear and stress. That's not the same as them having a moment where they have lost control and are having a tantrum. So it's more, by the time the tantrum comes, if it's a proper tantrum, they've already lost control. So this is where you want to help them regain control and then teach them, you know, find out what happened so you can avoid them getting to the point where they've lost control next time. It's perfectly normal, particularly for children between the ages of 2 and 3. But what you should do is you should, if your child will allow you to do it, bring your child in close. And as you're holding your child close to you, ideally heart to heart, you know, as close to your heart, slow your breathing so you're really calm. Keep yourself as calm as you possibly can. Hold your child close and just hold them until they calm down, until the sobbing stops. And that then you're teaching them that actually the world's a safe place. And yes, sometimes things will go wrong. Sometimes I'll get upset. Sometimes I'll lose control. But when that happens, I've got people who care about me and people who are going to help me recover. So you're actually wiring their brain to understand that people are going to be caring, people are going to look after them, and that the world is a safe space. So you're not going to stop children lose control sometimes. Now, that's if it's a tantrum, right? Now, a tantrum is when they've completely lost it and they can't hear anything you're saying. The other thing is if a child is objecting, if a child is crying because there's something they don't want to do, like they don't want to go to bed, so they will cry the place down. And, you know, there was a rule back when I was a kid, which is many, many years ago, that, you know, that whole spare the rod, spoil the child, and crying's good for their lungs, and all these things that are said about children, you know, leave them to cry, it's good for them. Well, leaving them to cry, if you understand that behavior is communication, and when children are upset, they're communicating a need, and that need could be actually a physical need, couldn't it? So, you know, when children are put to bed, it could be that they're really, really lonely and they're quite fearful of being on their own, or they just want to be with mummy because that's a safe place to be. So I personally don't believe in just leaving children to cry. I don't think it's good for them. I think if we want to teach children the world's a safe space, then we need to be responsive. We need to be able to explain to them and talk to them and have, you know, rhythms and rituals really support that. Having a predictable rhythm and ritual that supports the child to settle into a process, which might end in them, will end in them going to bed. But they become so familiar with the routine that it's just the natural next step. So I don't think it's good to ignore children's calls if they're distressed, for sure. doesn't mean that you do everything you can to avoid children from crying. You know, just like with adults, having a good cry can be good for you. It's a release of energy, it's a release of distress. So it can be really good for you to really let that go and, you know, have a good cry. So I'm not saying avoid children's crying at all costs. I'm saying just don't ignore their distress, that it is very different. So, you know, a child can still be crying because they don't want to do it, but you've been in, you've nurtured them, you've explained what's going to happen, and you've explained why. Then, you know, if they're still upset about it, they might have a cry, but I wouldn't leave it for too long before you go in and offer reassurance. So Sam says, I know some parents can relate to this as well. Whenever we want our little ones to follow our directions, we would scare them until they follow what we want them to do. Yeah. Well, you know, this is the thing, Sam, and it's so great that you're honest about this. Fear is to create a situation where we're frightening our children is not really a great way to teach them that the world is a good place to live in, and that, you know, people are kind. And that's what we want children to learn, isn't it? That the world's a safe space, people are good, we want to see the best in people, we want our children to do the same. So if we as parents are threatening our children, then that's not really a good place to start. But I want you to know that everybody, we all parent the way we were parented. That doesn't make you a bad parent, because anybody who takes the time to listen to webinars like this and you know, try and become a better parent for themselves, then you're clearly an amazing parent. So it can just take some time to work through some habits that have been ingrained in us since we were children ourselves. So I would say definitely don't threaten your child, because they're not likely to go to sleep, because if you frighten them, then they're going to be potentially in fight or flight mode, which is a hyper alert state, and it will take a long time for them to settle down and go back to sleep. So it's not good practice. There's a couple of books I've got out just for this webinar, actually, because I think they are amazing books. So I recommend them to anybody. And one is this one, and it's called Unconditional Parenting, Moving from Rewards and Punishment to Love and Reason. It's a really good book. It's a bit of a heavier read than this one, which I've recommended before. This is a much lighter read. And this one is called The Whole Brain Child. So it's revolutionary strategies to nurture your child's developing mind. And Sam, I would recommend you read this book. It's a fairly quick read, and it's a one you can dip in and out of. But I would definitely recommend you read it, because it will give you more strategies on what to do and how to support your child. And it's more how to support you, because the last thing I want is for parents or educators to be thinking, oh, I'm a terrible parent or a terrible educator because I'm not doing all of this. Most people aren't doing all of this. So what we're doing is we're learning all the time, just like your child is learning every day how to behave. We're learning every day how to support them to learn how to behave. And don't kid yourself, I've learned this myself, having had 3 sons. Every child is here to teach you something new. So you think you've got it sussed when your first child reaches the age of 3 or 4, and you think, wow, I'm just about getting there. You know, they're sleeping through the night, they're good with their bedtime routines, they're eating their meals, and then you have baby number 2, and the whole rule book goes out the window, and you have another totally different personality, and all the strategies are different, which is why we talked about some of the strategies in this webinar. So one book is and Shelley's recommended a book here as well, that yes, one of them is Unconditional Parenting, that's the one, Shelley, and The Whole Brain Child. Thank you for posting those links, Sam. That's great. Really, both really, really good books. I'd highly recommend them. And then maybe you can come and do one of these webinars for us when you've read it too, because we all love to talk about behaviour, because it's one of the things we all struggle with quite a bit. So I hope this has been useful. It's been great to have you here. If you have any ideas about what we can talk about next month, what you'd like to hear about, please do post it in our Facebook feed, and we'll keep an eye on that, and we might pick a different topic of conversation next time, because I think we've done a few on behaviour now. And by the time you've read them books, then we might not need to talk about this for a while. Happy to, though, if people decide it's something that you want to hear more about. So thank you everyone for joining, and I will see you next month. Have a good month ahead and stay safe all. Bye.